Donald Trump widens his lead in the race for the White House as prosecutors fight to preserve his March trial date. Plus, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky travels to Washington hoping to rescue a new military aid package. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu and this is The Heat. The current race for the White House has rapidly evolved into fierce debates, not just on domestic issues, but also foreign policy matters like Ukraine. All this happening as former President Trump faces a host of criminal charges and President Biden struggles to get ahead in the polls. There is a lot to talk about. Let's get straight to our panel. Brice is a conservative columnist and host of the radio talk show, The Brice is Right. Randy Zelin is a criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor. Also with us is Adolfo Franco. He's an attorney and Republican strategist. And Frank Sesno served as a senior vice president and Washington bureau chief for CNN. He's currently the executive director of George Washington University's Alliance for a Sustainable Future. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Frank, let me start with you. Just under a year to go before the next presidential election that takes place next November. At this stage, looking at the polls, if the election were held right now, Donald Trump would defeat President Joe Biden. And given that the former president is facing 91 felony charges, this is unprecedented in this country. What's driving those numbers?
What's driving those numbers is a base that is rock solid for Donald Trump, the base that Donald Trump has convinced, along with in his camp, including friendly media, that the Justice Department and the prosecution, that this is part of a vast political process that's been out to get him since he was elected the first time. The country under Joe Biden is heading not only in the wrong direction, but disastrously in the wrong direction. It's a remarkable thing because in any other...
Okay, Frank, we are having a few problems with your connection. We'll try and fix that. Let me move on to Adolfo Franco. Adolfo, the former president, Donald Trump, says that if he is re-elected president, then his administration will go after those government agencies which he and his supporters believe were weaponized against him over the past few years of President Biden's presidency. He has been accused by his opponents of wanting to be a dictator. And when he makes threats like that, doesn't it lend credence to those accusations?
Well, not at all, because I think the majority of the American people actually believe that the system, as I do, has been weaponized against President Trump, and that he's been treated, there's a two-tier justice system, and treated unfairly. So President Trump is not going after anybody. He is going to rectify the situation to have a system of justice that I think, and most Americans believe, should apply to everyone equally. So the accusations of dictator and so forth, of course, last time I looked was New York Times, Washington Post, and The Atlantic, not exactly unbiased media in my view. You know, for a long time, Hillary Clinton referred to a vast right-wing conspiracy. I think there is a left-wing conspiracy of the press and others that are trying, and the legal system, trying to stop President Trump from even being on the ballot. So I think this is the travesty, and the threat to democracy has been demonstrated by Jack Smith, this Justice Department, in my view, in the view of Donald Trump. I think his lead is widening across the board. I'm glad we have Frank Sesno on here, because his old network has him up by President Trump by 10 points in Michigan and up in Georgia and in the key states. And that's the reason why. And he's also right, he didn't finish his statements, that this is driven by a disastrous president whose policies the vast majority of the American people disagree with and believe are moving the country in the wrong direction. So you have a president who's had a track record for 4 years of great success domestically and internationally. People are comparing to the last 3 years of disaster, in my view. And you have a weaponized system and a president that I think is ready to go on day one to set the country back on course. Okay, I want to get back to Frank. Frank, I believe you are back with us. That's good news. Frank, you were telling us about why Donald Trump is enjoying the kind of support that he does right now in the opinion polls. And you mentioned that his base is rock solidly in support of him. But this extends beyond the base, doesn't it, the support?
Well, it's it's rooted in the base. It's enough beyond the base so that he's got the kind of leads that he's got in the recent polls in battleground states and elsewhere. He's cut into certain demographics that Biden took last time. He's leading in states that Biden won last time. So yes, it goes beyond just the Donald Trump base. That's why Joe Biden and the Democrats should be very, very worried about this. Here's a former president, Trump, who's under indictment across the board, as we've discussed, who's got all the demerits that it would seem if you look at it as a, on a score sheet, and yet he's doing phenomenally well. Now, what people in the Democratic Party and around Biden are saying is, well, people haven't focused on the race yet. They haven't focused on all the bad stuff about Trump. But I'm not sure I buy that. People know what Donald Trump is all about. They know what his liabilities are and his assets. And this is a race now that is the only thing you can conclude is that this is very, very competitive, and Biden, right now anyway, has an uphill climb.
Right. Frank, you raise an interesting point there. I mean, do these polls also tell us that American voters are not buying into these legal cases against Donald Trump, that they see it more as a political hit job rather than genuine criminal charges against him?
The country is so divided on it. That's the issue, and that too is in these polls. And you see some of the polls, when people are asked if he were convicted, would that change your vote? And some suggest it would, but it's not an overwhelming thing. Look, if people had concluded otherwise, there are several still very credible candidates running in the Republican Party against Trump, sort of against Trump, because they don't raise him very much, but they've got very little traction. I mean, Trump is up by 40 points, 30 points in some of these primary and caucus states where Republicans have been spending the better part of a year, these other candidates, campaigning on their own behalf and against him. Yeah. So it's very discomforting for those around Biden to conclude this. But this guy, Donald Trump, who you're seeing in this picture, for all of the issues that have been raised against him, has a very strong standing. It's rock solid in his base, but you're right, it goes beyond his base. That's the only explanation for the numbers and polls that we're now seeing.
Brandon, as Frank just said, Trump has, in fact, extended his lead over his fellow party members in the race for the nomination for the Republican Party, as Frank said, 30 to 40 points. Some of those candidates were on the debate stage last week. One of them was Nikki Haley. There was a big focus on her. This is part of what she had to say. Let's listen.
Our country is in chaos. We see it on the southern border. We see it on our streets in our cities. We see it on college campuses. We feel it with our economy, with inflation and with debt. And we feel it around the world with wars in Europe and within the Middle East. We have to stop the chaos, but you can't defeat Democrat chaos with Republican chaos. And that's what Donald Trump gives us. My approach is different. No drama, no vendettas, no whining.
So, Brandon, do any of those candidates who were on that debate stage have any chance of catching up with Donald Trump, perhaps even overtaking him? Or is his hold on that leading position a lock right now?
Absolutely not. And those candidates, you might as well say it's an interview for the vice presidency. See, here's the challenge with when you talk about no chaos. The chaos, ironically, didn't come from the Don. The chaos came from the left. And what I find interesting, you would think with 91 counts, with the fact that this guy is literally looking at prison's door, he's actually polling better than Joe Biden, to the point where if the election were today, most Americans said, I'm sticking with the Donald because at least I know where he stands. When you talk about the economy, when you talk about inflation, when you talk about global conflict, when you talk about a dictator, an EV mandate where now states like California or Maryland are forcing people to move in the direction of those vehicles. People are saying this is not what I signed up for in 2024, in 2020. Yeah. And so I think right now, when you look at Nikki Haley, you look at DeSantis, one of those two, more than likely, will become our next VP. But right now, it's hard to say that the Donald is leading. And again, he might be the Republicans' best chance to get back into the White House. Now, what does that mean for 2024? If he wins, that's another conversation. But we're talking about this could be the greatest political comeback that we've seen, at least I've seen in my time on this earth.
Randy, great to have you with us. Welcome to the show. If we look at Trump's legal woes, the special counsel, Jack Smith, is urging the United States Supreme Court to resolve urgently Trump's claims that he's immune from prosecution on these charges related to his alleged bid to subvert the outcome of the 2020 election. I mean, does Trump have any argument at all. Jack Smith, that is, says that without swift United States Supreme Court action, this trial could be delayed indefinitely.
Well, the thing is, the initial determination has to be simply, what is Mr. Trump's motivation? If his motivation is to prevail on the law and that, in fact, he is immune from criminal prosecution, then he should welcome Jack Smith's plan to go directly to the Supreme Court. Let's put it on the table and let's get it decided. Why waste time? Conversely, if it's the president's goal to stall and delay these trials until after the election, so this way he does not have a conviction against him, then the last thing he wants is for him to join Jack Smith in front of the Supreme Court of the United States. He wants to take, as I guess one would say once upon a time, the slow boat to China. So it really depends upon what Mr. Trump really has in mind.
Frank, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. You know, every move that Donald Trump makes is calculated, and every court that he's gone to or not gone to, every debate he's attended or not attended for that meeting, for that matter, is very deliberate. And so is this move. He goes to the Supreme Court, but I think it's a high-risk move, because I think it's very possible that the Supreme Court says, sorry, Mr. President, presidents are just as accountable as anybody else. This is on track and on schedule. And then he's going to have a Trump court, a Trump Supreme Court, because he's got three appointees, three of his people who sit on that court, who've ruled against him. Now, whether that happens or not, I'm not predicting that. I don't know. I'm not a legal expert. But as a political matter, there's some risk involved in this, significant risk for him.
Well, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I may, just rapidly, is first of all, I think the Supreme Court will take this up. But the question, when I say take it up, is it's circumventing the appellate process. The normal process here would be to go through the appellate courts, and of course that would delay matters. It could eventually get to the Supreme Court one way or the other. The question of it's expedited. I'm predicting the Supreme Court will take this up, as it took up the Gore versus Biden case and the Nixon tapes without going through the appellate process. So I'm predicting that that will happen. But I agree with Frank. This is a calculation. I think in some regards, I think President Trump wants to delay this only because I think to date, these political persecutions have been favorable politically. So why not delay this for a period of time? The trial will eventually come at some point, putting aside what happens in the election in November. But therein is the Democrat agenda. They are now, since they are clearly losing in the polls, their strategy is let's prevent President Trump, or try to prevent President Trump from being president, either because he is disqualified in some shape, way, or form by a conviction, or because that will hurt him in the polls. So everyone has a political motivation here. This is a nice law school theory here, but there's a political agenda here. I believe the Supreme Court will take this up sooner. It will not. It will circumvent the appellate process.
Yeah, Adolfo, let me ask you this, Adolfo. You know, this is a case of Trump claiming that he's immune from prosecution. I mean, Frank makes the point that presidents are accountable just as anybody else is.
Well, we're talking about actions that took place while he was president, and that's what makes this a little bit different. In other words, he's not immune as an ex-president for actions he has as a private citizen, but we're talking about accusations that when he was president of the United States, and therefore where that immunity still applies even after he leaves office.
Okay.
And once again, he should sue his lawyers for malpractice, because the caption of the case reads as him being a candidate for president and not president. So the caption of the case dispels his own argument that what he did was as part of the scope of his duties as president.
Well, yeah, candidates don't have immunity. That's a fair statement.
Exactly.
Candidates do not have immunity. That's a fair statement. But
all right.
legal arguments
I want to move on. I want to move on to Brandon. Brandon, let's look at what's going on legally on the other side, so to speak. Not exactly with President Biden, but his son, Hunter Biden, facing 9 new charges, including 3 felonies for not paying $1.4 million in taxes. Now, those taxes have since been paid back with penalties. Hunter Biden says the indictment is being used to damage his father, the president. This case has also become very, very politicized. How do you see it?
Do the right thing, Mr. President. The reality is we all know that, this guy's getting special treatment because his son, this is the president of the United States' son, who's had issues before. But the reality is to say that, you didn't know, the president didn't know that his son was involved in these, Chinese dealings and didn't know that he owed taxes. We're talking about a guy that's been in public office, his father, for 40 years, and your son doesn't know that? Come on, give me a break. The reality is, finally, we're seeing where justice looks like it's going to prevail. And I say this, if a person, if you do the crime, you do the time. It doesn't matter if you're a president or the son of a president, the law is the law. And I'm glad that it at least seems like justice is prevailing, where this guy, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I question, is there more that we still don't know about Hunter Biden's dealings when his father was the vice president and now today with his father being the leader of the free world?
Yeah. Frank, before we move on to some of the foreign policy issues that are affecting domestic politics in the United States, I want to ask you about the CBS News poll, which shows that 61% of voters disapprove of President Biden's handling of the crisis in Gaza. There's also a very serious downward trend among key parts of his winning coalition, among black voters, among young voters. And of course, we've heard repeatedly this concern over his age. So what does the president do right now to turn these numbers around?
Well, if I had the answer to that, or if anybody did, they might be paying us a lot of money. Look, this is really hard. The problem is that the Gaza crisis is brutal and it's continuing and it's not going to stop. It comes into people's homes and on their phones throughout the day and the night. And there is a very substantial demographic split on this issue. Younger voters, more progressive voters are breaking from the Democratic coalition and frankly from the pro-Israel coalition in very dramatic ways. And this threatens the Biden administration profoundly because he is so firmly attached to Israel and he said, I've got your back no matter what. Combine this with some of these other things that we've been talking about, whether they're the legal challenges or the questions about the economy. That's why Biden's numbers are in such trouble. And to think that some of these storms are going to pass in the next 2, 3, 6 months is unrealistic. What does Biden do? He has to go out. He has to make his case. He has to explain it again and again and again. But it's not like he hasn't done that. And that doesn't resonate. Joe Biden's problem, as I see it, and I've covered a lot of presidents, and I've thought a lot about this, is he fundamentally, there is no Biden base. If you have a base, ask Trump, ask Obama, ask Reagan, they'll forgive a lot of things. Reagan made it through Iran-Contra. Others have gone through scandals. Biden doesn't have a base. Even absent a major scandal, his son is a problem. It's not a major scandal yet. Some see it that way. But the fact of the matter is that absent that base, you're hanging on for dear life, especially when you were elected by such a narrow margin. This is a very, very challenging time for him, and there's no easy way out, none.
Adolfo, let's look at another foreign policy issue that's become sort of enmeshed in domestic politics, and that is further funding for Ukraine. That funding is being held up by Republicans right now in Congress on condition that the president does something about immigration. In fact, the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, is in Washington right now trying to rescue that $60 billion aid package. Democrats say the Republican position is effectively handing Ukraine to Russia.
Well, I think this is the president's fault for this reason. It was the president who opened up the opportunity to tie border issues and border funding, specifically border funding from the standpoint of the administration, to these packages to move aid to Israel and Ukraine along. So it was a calculation that backfired, frankly, on the administration, because what happened is Republicans correctly, unanimously, and this includes the Mitt Romneys of the world and the hawks like Lindsey Graham on Ukraine, said this isn't a money issue for the border, it's a policy issue. So we're going to move these packages, since you opened it up, Mr. President, for, as he described, compromise and discussion, then change the border policy. So it would be a policy change that would be attached to this aid package. And, you know, again, despite what he said about being a uniter and getting 80% of what you want and compromise, he's unwilling to budge on this. So the packages are in peril unless these border policies are changed. So the Republicans are going to remain united on this, and it's either for the president, again, either to have another failure if he doesn't have funding for Ukraine and, frankly, Israel, or He's going to have to address the border, which in and of itself, we've talked in this program, is a monumental crisis. I will add briefly, Frank's absolutely right. You know, I worked for John McCain. We used to be called McCainiacs. Ronald Reagan, I came, was fanatic. People loved President Obama, Clinton, and so forth. Have you ever really met anybody who's crazy about Joe Biden? He is the accidental president. And that's why, to Frank's point, no matter what he says or what he does, he has the stigma of failure attached to him and a lack of enthusiasm by all of these voters. Worst situation is the situation with Israel. He is antagonized his hard left, which he has sold his soul to, and yet people who support Israel don't have any confidence in him either.
Brandon, let's look at the situation in the Republican Party. The former Republican Party vice chair in the House, that's for the House January 6th committee, Liz Cheney, she recently talked about the future of the Republican Party. This is some of what she had to say. Let's watch.
I'm going to look at this over the next couple of months through the lens of how do we stop Donald Trump. We're at a moment where the possibility of a third-party run is more something that we have to consider more than we ever have before because of the threat that Trump poses. But I also think we have to ensure that at some point we're unified against him.
So lots in there, Brandon. Liz Cheney talking about a third-party run. But what does this tell us? Is there a split in the Republican Party now? How deep is it, if there is one?
Well, I mean, it didn't take Liz Cheney to tell you that. We literally, a few months ago, removed the speaker. I mean, I would throw in the same boat I would throw Liz Cheney. I would throw Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, right now, Speaker Johnson has a huge task, and that's to unite the party. There are those folks who are pro-Trump and those folks who clearly, as you just heard, are not pro-Trump. But I'll tell you this, I was actually shocked that given her father's background, she wasn't the one that decided to run for president, that Nikki Haley just was. And so for her not to, you know, she's been talking about this for the last 6 months. I would have thought there would have been some action of her saying, you know what, I'm going to run to stop Donald Trump. We haven't seen that. So again, I mean, I think there is a if you want to call it civil war or disagreement, but right now you've got literally the pro-Trumps versus the anti-Trumps. That's what Speaker Johnson has to deal with. And my thoughts are if he can't get that under control in the next 6 months, we could be talking a different story.
Randy, we see so much confidence around the Trump candidacy right now, just looking at those polls. But what happens if that trial does go ahead at the beginning of March next year? If he is found, this is hypothetical, but if he is found guilty, he's convicted, what happens then? Can he continue with the run?
Well, certainly listening to my friends on the panel, I have to agree that there is a substantial part of this country that, as Mr. Trump once said, I could walk down Fifth Avenue, shoot someone, and nobody would care. And I think that his base feels that way about him, and there are more and more people who are more and more dissatisfied with the lack of border security and taxes and the economy and unemployment that really don't care other than what is life like for them at home. Mm-hmm. What's interesting, though, is in particular with Jack Smith's case. If that case goes to trial and Mr. Trump is convicted, could that be the one thing that disqualifies him from being in office? Because you can do just about anything and still be president except incite an insurrection.
Mm-hmm. Adolfo, what's your opinion on that?
Which is exactly right, which is their last card. They've been playing so many different cards to try to destroy Donald Trump. He's absolutely right. That analysis, that is the last thing is, let's deny the real jury, which should be the American people, to decide who their leader should be and their president. And that's what the elites in this country and the left and the media want to do. They're scared because they know they're in the minority. They've manipulated the system, and now they're trying to deny him from being on the ballot. I don't think it will work. I agree with Frank. You remember this program a year ago? Oh, the Trump base, he only has 35%. No one can get there. No, this is the Trump base plus, just as all the other guests have indicated. And not only that, but it continues to grow and continues to grow. This Liz Cheney thing and Manchin as possible third party is an absolute joke. If you think they're going to peel away Republicans, they might have peeled away some independents and Democrats who are dissatisfied with Joe Biden, but they're not going to appeal to Republicans. If these conventional candidates like Nikki Haley and others who are not anti-Trump but distinguish themselves from Trump can't do it, you think Liz Cheney, an anti-Trump person, can have any impact other than pull away Democrat votes?
Frank, there are a number of third-party candidates in the race right now. We've got Cornel West, you've got Jill Stein, Robert Kennedy Jr., the West Virginia Senator, Joe Manchin. He may throw his hat into the race as well. At current polling, if we look at the numbers, none of them are likely to win, to become the next president. But we often hear the argument being made that a vote for Jill Stein or a vote for Cornel West or Robert Kennedy Jr. is actually a vote for Donald Trump. But the academic and activist Norman Finkelstein, he had a very interesting take on that argument. He was trying to explain how a vote for a third-party candidate can actually count. And this is with specific reference to Cornel West. In fact, he was on stage with Cornel West when he made this suggestion. He said West should issue non-negotiable demands to Joe Biden, perhaps October next year, in order for him to withdraw from the race. In other words, he'd say, look, if I've got 10 or 20% of the support, I'll give you that support if you meet my demands. So one of those demands was that the United States withdraw charges against Julian Assange, the journalist. The other was that Biden forgive all student debt. What do you make of that strategy? Can it work? No, it can't work. It's not, there's not a credible candidate who's going to give in to that kind of demand. It would project weakness, which then compounds on the attacks that are already being made. Biden's got enough problems trying to manage Israel and Gaza and Ukraine and Russia and China and all the rest. But this is exactly the problem and the point, is that these relatively small, relatively fringe candidates, whether they're Kennedy or West, are carping and they're adding to the noise and they're adding to the appearance of chaos. And the one thing that a presidential candidate cannot do is appear to be weak. Many argue that Jimmy Carter lost because he allowed himself to be held hostage to the Iran hostage crisis. So I don't think that works, but it shows the very difficult place. Adolfo was talking a moment ago about and others about the problems within the Republican Party. Well, the problems within the Democratic Party are just as strong. You've got these strong wings that are pulling from the sides, and that's a distraction that Biden cannot afford now. Okay, and that is where we have to leave it. Thank you to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.